It's very different, right? Because it was trying to help. It wasn't identifying an opportunity and going, it could be, a widget sold to, it was, or like I've identified a disruptive thing to go in and, do whatever. It was really like, wow, I think we're ready to modernize our industry. And as an insider, I kind of know and as an optician, I know the challenges and, where you can really get yourself in trouble if you try to cut corners. And I was seeing a lot of that happening out there. So it was really a pull, to like, hey, how can you help? It starts with conversations and then it turned into a product, which is pretty cool.
Welcome to another episode of Optometry Profits Revealed. I'm your host, Peter Precht. Today, we are with a 20-plus year veteran in the optical industry, Dave Barton. Dave Barton is an ABOC optician. He spent 7 years building an online direct-to-consumer brand products inside of our industry. He's formerly with Oliver Peoples and Paul Smith. And we're going to talk a little bit about that direct-to-consumer stuff with davidkind.com. Without any further ado, Dave Barton. Thank you so much for being here, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Really appreciate it. Good seeing you again.
Absolutely. I think it's, you and I have a little bit of a special connection because we're trying to integrate technologies, existing, future technologies, bringing them as hands in and as hands held as we can directly into the independent optometric market, for lack of better terms. And it's exciting. It's 3 or 4 years has been a crazy journey. And but before we dive into that, let's connect, if you don't mind. Walk me through your history, because you're coming up on 20 some years. Or 20 plus years. That's a bit of a journey. What brought you to the place of creating Optify?
Yeah, it's good. So I didn't know I would end up in the industry. I'm talking to you from San Diego. I went to college here at UC or SDSU, sorry, and I started my career working in the action sports industry because I was into surfing and different things like that in San Diego.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so I worked for a company called Spy. They're like Spy Optic.
Okay.
They're yeah, kind of like a small size Oakley at the
Mm-hmm.
time, and I started working my way up in the company and eventually ran product there. And I fell in love with the industry after going to the trade shows, Vision East, Vision West, Mito, Silmo, and really falling in love with the fact that it's the only product I can think of that's a medical device and a fashion item. So more so than the action sports side, I fell in love with the product and the design aspects and everything of it. So I wanted to get move to the premier eyewear company in the U.S. at the time, which was Oliver Peoples.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, they kind of created a lot of it was licensed stuff, and they created a standalone eyewear brand around the merits of just great product.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so Bill Barton and Patty Pereira left to start Barton Pereira. Dave Rose left to do some design for Salt, I believe. So they're looking for someone to fill in some of that work. So I moved to LA and worked for Oliver Peoples and ran their product. And
That must have been fun.
it was cool. Yeah, it was. I mean, that's where I got my master's or my PhD in eyewear design and development and fits and things like that. Because man, do you hear feedback quick when you don't hit the mark on a frame? That's for sure.
They're not shy
No.
of making the adjustment. That's why they're where they are. Um,
Yes.
it's they take that back and forth. And you've heard me and certainly in other podcasts talk about that. The best people I've learned from were those people that demonstrated that back and forth, between optician and optometrist. And here it is in a design end, which I think is really wonderful. Anyway, keep going.
It was cool. Yeah. Very different. Spy was, a lot of kids in surf shops selling sunglasses and goggles. This is like seasoned, opticians that, know the collection better than most of the people even in the company did, right? Just because they've been selling it for years.
Right.
So then that Oakley purchased Oliver Peoples, and then Luxottica purchased Oakley, which came with Oliver Peoples. So I was part of the the management team that kind of merged Oliver Peoples into those two entities. So it even got to see behind the curtain in the largest, eyewear industry or eyewear, business in the industry.
Right.
And I knew that wasn't really my future. I love the food in Italy, but I didn't really want to be back and forth, all the time. So, I wanted to stay more independent and more hands-on. So I started consulting, and I saw this opportunity to, saw Warby Parker coming onto the market, and it wasn't really the product that I thought that I was used to developing. So I wanted to come up with something that, would kind of hit the top level product, that Oliver Peoples was producing at the time. And I launched a direct to consumer company called David Kind. And part of that, the platforms that are available, the Shopify's, the Wix, the WooCommerce, all these things aren't really sufficient for, without a ton of customizations for selling eyewear online, particularly prescription eyewear. And I wanted to do it with optical dispensing, best practices intact. So like, what about PDs? What about seg heights? What are, proper fits, styling of eyewear, all of that, kept that. So yeah, that became that business. And from that business, I started getting my colleagues in the industry asking around, how do we do this? We don't really need another brand necessarily. We want the ability to be able to showcase, our services and our products and serve our customers in a modern way. And they're like, Dave, how do we get our stuff online? How'd you do this? And that is what turned in that technology ended up getting spun out into Optify.
Which again, it sounds like a series of connective dots, a series of back and forth,
Yeah.
adjustment, which is how things are done. I think that's how pages get turned. You get in the seat, you try, you move forward, you start moving things and turning heads. I I think I just think the idea of building online commerce at the time that you did it was, you know, in a way you're fortunate that you came into the industry the way that you did, because had you come in other ways, ugh, these people get rocks thrown at them quick.
Yes, absolutely. It's very different, right? Because it was trying to help. It wasn't identifying an opportunity and going, it could be, a widget sold to, it was, or like I've identified a disruptive thing to go in and, do whatever. It was really like, wow, I think we're ready to modernize our industry. And as an insider, I kind of know and as an optician, I know the challenges and, where you can really get yourself in trouble if you try to cut corners. And I was seeing a lot of that happening out there. So it was really a pull, to like, hey, how can you help? It starts with conversations and then it turned into a product, which is pretty cool.
I'm going to roll into a couple of points that were in the review of Optometric business article. The touch points, we were mentioning this, absolutely huge. Um, Obviously, Mark Clark has talked about it. Caesar and I have talked about it. You and I have talked about it. You know, that frequent interaction is so intense and huge to business success. And explain out loud what we talked about, how when someone books an eye exam with a doc that is working with Optify, what happens?
Yeah. So it's about influence. It's not just about selling them something online. It's about engaging them,
Right.
with your optical. There's a lot of different tools, text reminders. You have a website, you have, your EHR where you keep your data and all of that. This is really um, meeting the patient where they are. So when they have an exam, they're getting a text reminder to come in and sit in the seat, but they're not being encouraged to browse the glasses. So they're having to do that somewhere else, not on your site. If they do it on your site, they can pre-select frames. They can come in. They can be they can give you a little more, they feel more, what's the word for it? Like they participate in the experience more.
We know that between booking an eye exam and being at an eye exam, they're doing this. It's absolutely genius to connect that directly back with the practice. So, so when I'm an optometrist, I don't understand, Dave. How does this work? How is this? What product are they looking at? Explain this to me.
Yeah, great. So we sync up with their practice management system or whatever inventory system that they have. And we overlay that over a catalog of images and a database of eyewear, the largest in the industry. And then we display on their site, under their subdomain, their inventory that's in stock, and we refresh that every day. So when a patient looks at it, they're looking at what they have, which is really important to the practice because it's like syncs up the offline and online experience.
Right. Oh, I threw a bunch of boards on at 8 p.m. last night. Don't worry. But
Yeah,
next
they show
tomorrow,
up.
you're set tomorrow. Yeah, I think that's
Yes.
huge. I really think that's huge. Let's talk about some numbers that were in that article. They indicated that they were a $2 million practice. They were talking about a 25K per month increase that they were experiencing. Um, Connect this with, I mean, that I think that's completely awesome. Like you said, they were listening to their people, in
Yeah, they're
some
meeting them.
right,
Meet them where they are, right?
right.
I mean, if you think, I always ask when I do demos and talk to optometrists, okay, what's your capture rate? And let's say it's, an excellent 60%. National average is below that. The next question I ask is, where do you think the rest of the people go? You just wrote them a new prescription. Where'd they go? And they're like Costco, Warby Parker, Zenny, something like that. And they don't really know exactly why. I think price usually, but a lot of times you can compete on that. And if you build value, price is less of an issue for a lot of people. So a big thing is how do you capture those patients' attention before they come in? So they're coming more open-minded and leaning into a potential purchase. And that can help convert more patients to buy and buy more.
I think I'm more apt to think that I'm being listened to.
Yeah.
If that does that make sense? Obviously, I can look at it from my years of experience, and you know, I remember when things were a certain way or a different way. But yeah, meeting people where they are. I know we keep coming back to that, but touch points to it, constant communication. These are things that were lacking in the old.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that because to me, these doors begin to open. Okay, but then the professional exchange begins to take place. Then the expertise gets involved. Then the optician can say, hey, this is going to work a little better for what we want to do, but I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have that ability to plug in to, not just what we're doing, but in any open way, call, call the optician, call that dispensary right away if there's any bump or hiccup. And that's really, they don't have that capacity
Yep.
with, I mean, yes, I guess you could call a Warby Parker showroom and find out if a frame is there, but you know, is my prescription going to work with this? Is my prism correction going to be proper?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. So they need the optical expertise from their optician,
Right,
and they appreciate the styling, advice and expertise too. But it doesn't mean they don't want to have some like feedback and some insight into what they want, right? Like,
right,
and they're not in this, the way that the software and everything works in the experience, this isn't a self-service thing. They're not adding to cart, checking out and hoping for the best. This is a communication tool around the products that you have. So you, as an optician, when you receive that patient in, you have a much better idea of what they're into, what they're interested in, and you can really help guide them. And they appreciate it too, because now they're ready to kind of receive that advice, versus having to go through the dance. And I know you have a different type of bit. I mean, some people go in and they specifically want to be styled by their favorite optician.
right.
This doesn't change that. There's a continuum though. There's a lot of other people out there that, want to participate more in their like experience. So yeah.
Both of the products that we are selling to the optometric community, mostly, and opticians clearly, mine is very catered to opticians uh, inside of the optometric community, but
Right.
and then plugging in the uncovery part as remotely and successfully as you can remotely, but factoring what you've begun to do is connect back into the independent community what they were watching that was going away.
Yes.
And it's undeniable.
Yeah.
How, I mean, explain to me that dialogue with optometrists because I do think it takes a certain kind of optometrist to even begin that dialogue with you. And I've had some wonderful conversations with people recently, and particularly Dave Friedfeld with Clear Vision, saying, "Peter, don't show up with the cast iron, you know, cast iron advice and dong, hey, listen to me." And he is right. It's it's how the message is delivered is a large part of how we relate what we're doing.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit to that? Because I'm sure you got an experience or two that you can
No, I do, and there's a few. Yeah.
fold into the mix, you
Oh
know?
no, I get there are things like, well, if I say it's okay to look on my website, then that's permission to look on anybody's website. So aren't I encouraging people to go buy glasses online from Warby Parker or anywhere else?
Oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm like, well, not exactly. They're already doing it. So unless you're going to rip down the cell
Well,
towers around
well,
your office, and they can't get on their phone to start browsing stuff,
well,
you're
they
just not
can't.
doing the influencing. So they're just
Well,
doing it behind your back, basically.
they can't just get there. There's a way to get there, and that's directly through the practice and the doctor.
That's
That's
right. This is a tool to enable that. And I equate it to sometimes to like the technology that helps your practice, like the text reminders that get the patients in, the website that lets them learn more about you and find you online,
right.
EHR system that helps you, keep track of your patient records and everything. These are all technologies that at one point you're like, I don't know if I really need that. But I'd say the same thing as with what we're doing. Getting your optical online
Hmm.
is very important to the patients because they want to be able to interact with your products. And if you don't provide that, you're just making it harder on them.
Hmm.
And then they start asking for things like PDs. Like no one knew what that was, before Warby Parker.
They do
So,
now. Yeah,
and they all do now.
exactly.
And they honestly shouldn't because it was
Hmm.
just, us not providing them a more seamless path to a purchase
Right.
made them want to ask for that. And I'm not talking about like, getting back the Zenny optical type of stuff. That's really inexpensive stuff that is like, it's a little bit different purchase. I'm talking about there is a lot of revenue that you could be capturing at the upper end of the market if you just make it easier on the patients to buy it from you.
I'm very excited that that's the end of the market that's showing interest in us. And it makes complete sense. It's the end of the market showing interest in you.
Yeah.
These are people that understand the relationships at different levels. I think maybe they listen to their patients at some different levels. When they hear the word online from a patient, I don't think it raises the hair on the back of their neck. I think if anything, it makes them want to lean in.
Yep.
That's a culture. These are cultures that that we come across that are receptive to what we're doing, and how they can see those really strong relationships and the potential of them going remote. Because here's some things that have happened that I've watched over my career. I've watched like seasoned opticians say, "I've had it here," and they go someplace else in town, and boom, holy crow, they bring 15% of the people with them. And the practice didn't see that coming. They really didn't know that that was going to take place. And they, oh, that's not going to really go down. And, I mean, again, that's not a situation. I don't want to get into weird HR stuff right here. And that's not the point of what we're talking about. But it is a really interesting perception of what the value of that optician is in that particular scenario, and how sometimes that can be duplicated in other places. What does the optician, what do those relationships bring to the table? How do you quantify them? And um, that's the best thing about your product, is you can directly quantify um, a segment of patient that is highly interested in going to an online shop to shop for glasses. Makes They've been doing it. It may be the only way they have. I don't know if there's demographics with that. Do you talk to that, or no, or age?
Yeah.
Do we want to get into age with no, or I don't know.
No, sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, we get a lot of feedback, and it's the post-pandemic digital world is more it's less like specific demographics around age and things like that. It's more psychographics around how people adopted technology, and age has less to do with it. I mean, yeah, generalizations, I guess, but there are a lot of folks that have adopted online or omni-channel really experiences like that you wouldn't have expected. So I get you know um,
Hmm.
older demographics that do a lot of shopping online, right?
Right.
Because I mean, the pandemic kind of forced them to, all of us, I guess. And then they kind of, it stuck with a lot. And then they do more research, time and practice, busy days, whatever it is. If they can, use their time efficiently, they'll do it, and they'll pick, I get like, oh, yeah, I just had an elderly woman come in who picks a pair of Tom Fords. I never would have thought that she would do that. And it's happening, because
Absolutely, makes perfect sense. But again, to plug that back into my world, I can't tell you how unbelievably enjoyable it is to work remote.
yeah,
To the ability that I can play with my schedule. I have abilities with my grandchildren. I have abilities with my daughters. I have abilities that I can travel,
absolutely.
can do whatever I want. There are things that cost more, and there are things that cost less, but it's completely worth it. And I'm not saying this to say, "Oh, look at me, opticians," but I kind of am. I mean, it is well, it can be very rewarding, but creating that funnel, like we've talked about, is something that we have begun to hurdle. But it's some interesting markets. In we talked about high end. Some of the interesting connections back downward are safety,
Yeah.
and that I fully believe is a budding market for what you're doing. And if there's a really smart synergy for what we're both doing, it is completely inside of that market, because it also opens up a doorway to be a very strong and potent olive branch to a community that happens to have a high patient base that's industrial, high patient base that has to wear prescription safety eyewear. So we know that's going on. Well, these people want to plug in to your experience. They have the ability to access professional advice here.
Mhm.
So we're no longer an Achilles heel per se with the optometric community. That was one of the biggest things that I began to experience, certainly with safety, was people didn't like fitting somebody for a dispensing fee and they're out the door. I totally understand that. But what an awesome way to plug in an insurance sale with somebody who leaves a kit. There leaves a frame fitting that for safety,
Yeah,
with a kit, and the reason they know those frames are in there is because they chose them in your store.
that's right. There's so much opportunity to link up these experiences, so much, and with these digital elements, and it's super efficient for the
Right.
optician, for
Yeah,
the
we're just
practice.
we're just at the beginning of it right now. There's so many ways of plugging in and connecting to patient experiences that again come back to independent experiences or independent practices. But again, like we're talking about, the tools are only just now becoming aware, and I think that that's been part of the certainly part of our battle. Is that we've very much wanted to start organically, but where the resonation does end up coming back in is that person who does have a Zenny kit or Warby kit, and they're like, I don't, I don't know what I'm doing. And you're right. I don't, Peter, that's who you're going to sell to. No, that's not who I'm plugging into. I'm plugging into what you're doing. So those are some uphill battles. And those are things that I think it's awesome that you found ways for them to resonate in a $2 million practice who's got this is a practice that's got strong investments in every angle, not optometrically, tech wise, front desk. They're doing it right. They have to. They do it right. They do it seamlessly. Their patients were talking about what you and I bring to the table. So, right. So that I think is so wonderful that they found a way, or that they were they had their on the pulse per se of listening to a patient experience. And
They're really, I think, looking, yeah, to level the playing field, I think is what they said. That's really what they're trying to do. Because, if you look at the developments that are happening in big box optical, they have heavy online presence, but they can also invest a lot of money into that. And there just weren't a lot of options for the smaller and medium sized businesses, independents, to be able to like do that without a really massive investment that would be too outsized for the size of the business, and how, you know what I mean? But now they have the opportunity to bring it in, automate the majority of it, meet the patients where they are, but not disrupt what they're doing in the practice. It actually is like augmenting it. Yeah.
I think that's the best part of the products that we bring to them. They automatically have a perception that they're going to have to get involved with managing something, and they don't. They don't at all. And I use the word plug in way, way too often, but it's very,
Turnkey. We could
very
use that. Yeah.
apropos, because
Yeah.
that maybe
No,
that'd be a little bit
same
better.
way.
Well, it is, but it's relatable. because you just want, when you begin doing business with something, you just want it to go as seamless as possible. And I do understand that. And, we could show videos and we can show where we're doing other places, but to bring it full force straight in is an amazing thing. I think there are situations that I want to connect with this before we go. People don't have an optician. Oh, well, you and Dave just want to replace opticians. What about what I just told? What about what I just said? You know,
Right.
how long are they going to look for one? Uh, these are real issues. You've heard me talk about remote issues that recently have come to my table where there's, practices in urban environments. And let's face it, there's some weird respiratory stuff floating around. I don't know about your neighborhood, but boom. So now you've literally shut down, and it's because of, a sickness that came through. So, you know, plug in with us. It makes all the sense in the world,
Hmm.
and enjoy doing it, because it is seamless and it's a very, very easy thing to do. And, we've got the kinks out and we're having fun with it. Now's the fun part. Now it's just demo. Here we go. We're going to show you what we're doing. And it's been wonderful to get to this point, but it's certainly been a journey too. And I really do think that there's interesting ways of reviewing what had gone on in the safety world, because that there was some real disconnects there. And what a wonderful venue to introduce optometric practices to online engagement and online sale.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
It is. And I think that I keep hearing more and more of this drum. It obviously is related to my past experiences. And I'm certainly hearing from previous, safety contacts that are asking for this because they know it's out there and they don't know how to implement it or put it to motion. So, from an optometric standpoint and from a safety program standpoint, it's really cool to have some implant optician that's here introducing the products that you and I have for
Exactly.
optometry that's local. It's a
It
real
digitizes
friendly
a local
introduction.
experience. It's cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dave, this has been really cool. I want to reach back. Let's connect back in the fall with a deliberate time so that we can go, all right, how did this summer do? What happened?
Yeah.
Let's talk about our bumps and bruises
Exactly.
as as we move forward in this,
There'll be some great wins too. We'll have some nice. Yeah.
that's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
Is that those takeaway stories? The opticians that come back to us with those lovely stories and those connection stories and the wins, the practice wins, the major practice wins, the 14% practice
Yeah. That's
wins.
And I'm
Oh
having opticians
man,
now jumping, from one practice to another and bringing Optify to their new practice too, which is, that is the best.
right,
That's the best validation too, is to have an optician, that was probably, I don't know if they were the ones that brought it into their practice or not, but maybe they inherited it or they were
right.
given it. And then they ended up moving and ended up at another location and they brought it with them. That is so cool. That's been the best.
That's somebody who lived the experience of face to face with a patient that was going to go off and buy.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Or just, yeah, exactly. They just found it useful to see what that patient was interested in. They were able to make the software work for them. It was a tool, a selling tool. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, they saw the benefit of it so that when they ended up somewhere else,
Yeah,
they
they
were
bought it.
able to they were able to the conversation was eerily familiar probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So
Dave, this has been wonderful, man. Thank you so much. I
good
think
to hear.
we have a lot more to talk about, and I definitely am looking forward to our reconnect and seeing how things have been going, because 24 is an amazing year. It's a lot of different ways that our products are going to get introduced and integrated, and it's going to be fun to see how we connect some of those dots. So.
Yeah, agreed. I'm excited for your business too. 24 is gonna be great.
It is, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If any of this resonates with you, please go to iseeclearly.com and submit an inquiry to info@iseeclearly.com. This has been wonderful. Take good care, everybody, and we'll see you next episode.